Welcome, welcome, Emma, to Fast Politics.
Thank you so much for having me on, Molly. I'm really happy to be here.
So, the Wall Street Journal had a piece today about Stephen Miller, which was basically like how he was able to be Donald Trump's id. Just the very framing that there is someone who needs to be Donald Trump's id is kind of spectacular and also very just so incredibly soul crushing. Discuss.
Right. Wasn't the whole thing id the entire time? I mean, I would say more like I appreciate the framing on that front, but it's more like he does Trump's id's groundwork. I mean, at this
Right.
point, Trump is so riddled by dementia and laziness and ailments that it's like Stephen Miller can execute the worst impulses of Trump at a rate that he's completely incapable of doing. So he can outsource his id to
Yeah.
Stephen Miller. I feel like that's a better way to encapsulate it, right?
Yeah. It's funny because it's like I think about Trump 2.0 and just how much worse everything is categorically. And when you look at the immigration stuff, it's a great example of just, you know, Trump 1.0, there was anxiety that things would, that Trump would do things like this, but he never did we didn't have people in their cars being shot, citizens in their cars being shot. Or we had family separation, but we didn't have like this sort of, there's family separation going on that we don't even know about, right? Like that's the thing I'm struck by. And it makes me think about the Washington Post being, today Bezos just basically cut a third of the paper because, it's not his interest anymore. But he sort of lost interest in this whole democracy project. And I mean, who are we to tell one of the richest people in the world that democracy is good? If we had more reporters, we would know. I think there's way more family separation than we're seeing.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, quick point on Stephen Miller. I do think that he almost has the ghost of Roy Cohn embodying him, where Trump
I
sees
often
so
think about
much
that.
of Cohn in Stephen Miller. This, rabid racist, the anti-communism of Roy Cohn. You could also, I think, tie into Stephen Miller's rabid Zionism,
Yeah.
cracking down on free speech, and his other fascist inclinations, and just the idea that you attack, 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 and Trump sees that as strength, and you never admit defeat. That was Roy Cohn's mantra. That's
Yeah.
clearly Stephen Miller's mantra, and the directives that he's giving to ICE and to DHS. We had reporting on this from weeks ago that he was engaging in screaming matches about not meeting
Right.
certain quotas. It's not hyperbolic to talk about this in terms of like this is a Nazi. And I feel like in the modern context, that's how we should refer to him because it's accurate.
And the Roy Cohn point is a really good one. And my grandfather was jailed in the House of American Activities, and Roy Cohn actually interviewed my grandfather in this really interesting transcript. And he was sort of the henchman of McCarthy,
Right.
just like we're seeing Stephen Miller as the henchman of Donald Trump. They look the same, they act very much the same. They're both Jewish, but both very reactionary right wing extremists. And you'll remember that in Trump 1.0, he kept saying, "Where's my Roy Cohn? Where's my Roy Cohn?" So you do see that Stephen Miller has taken advantage of that in a way that I think is pretty interesting. The other thing I would say about when we look at this landscape is you do see there's so much push and so little pushback from the people who like the elites, right? I'm thinking about, like, Bezos again, just because he's on the brain after completely just ravaging the Washington Post. But Elon is a great example. Elon in the Epstein files spent the last 3 days tweeting about
Yeah.
how someone else is in the Epstein files. But it is like but there are people, like, when we go to Minnesota, there are, like, just random people who don't have power, who are just normal people who have jobs and lives and children, and they're putting it all on the line to protect each other. So it does feel like there is this sort of strange, like, almost a sort of fairy tale like story of this sort of good guys being the ones who have less.
Yeah, and you had mentioned about how we don't have enough reporting on ICE's activities and what they're
Right.
doing. Popular Information, Judd Legum had a piece a few weeks ago that just sent a chill down my spine about how these ICE concentration camps have essentially
Mhm.
not paid for any medical care since
That's right.
October. They've just stopped paying. So what? You think that the tens of thousands of people in detention aren't experiencing any health episodes? This is
Right.
what concentration camps look like. They're neglecting them, and then you get the reports about children being fed food with that's rotted.
Yeah.
There was a mother that told a immigration reporter who reported it to a local news station that they have no baby food. So for her
Yeah.
young child in this family detention center, she had to suck the sauce off of every individual piece of pasta before
Yeah.
giving it to their child because they can't digest it at that
Yeah.
point. So like we do not know the scale of the horrors here. But about the people of Minnesota, I mean, it is going to be one of the major through lines when we talk about this historical moment. And I'm not just talking about Trump 2.0 starting 2025 on, but even the resistance and the pushback to the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
Minneapolis and the people of Minneapolis and the Twin Cities have been at the center of the civil rights protests and movement of the past 10 years in response to fascism.
Yeah.
And I think they will be written about as such, as ordinary people who stood with their community, because I think for what back to Stephen Miller and what is so threatening to them about Minneapolis and Minnesota more broadly, it's a state with a fairly large social safety net compared to other
Mhm.
ones. It's a
Mhm.
state that has a tradition of democratic input and a rich history of democracy in that way. And it's multiracial in so many ways. I mean, you can go back to the conspiracy theories about Ilhan Omar marrying her
Mhm.
brother to get into the country and how that has been festering. And those were far right elements pushing that within Minnesota. So this has been brewing for a while, but you have a Somali American community with a very high rate of citizenship. They are both black and they are Muslim. And when you look at Stephen Miller as both a rabid racist when it comes to Latino and black people in this country,
Mhm.
but also as an Islamophobe and a Zionist, you can see how those two things connect. And Islamophobia, in terms of the bigotries that are accepted in modern society in America these days, I don't know if there's a more consequential form of hatred that has rolled back civil liberties for people really since 9/11 in the 21st century than America's bipartisan, unfortunately, very bigoted views about Muslim people.
Right. I mean, I think that there's certainly been it's the last acceptable, quote unquote, socially acceptable racism, or at least now with the Trump era's return to racism, it's a little bit more complicated. But for a long time, it was the only socially acceptable racism, which was pretty horrific. Also, the other thing I wanted to add when we talk about the camps or the jails or the concentration camps is that Bloomberg had really good reporting about how ICE is trying to buy more. They have they have all this money, right? They are like they're like they're basically like a small army, or actually a large army. There are many countries that have armies that have less money than ICE, and they want to buy up all these warehouses, which makes you wonder, like, these warehouses are not set up for people.
They're not. That would require even more outfitting for bathrooms, for
Mhm.
beds, more money for Donald Trump's private prison buddies, for whatever this slush fund is going towards. You can really draw a line to have you supported Donald Trump, donated to him, donated to
Right.
his beautiful ballroom, which seems to be at the top of his mind as the country crumbles in front of our very eyes and our democracy fails due to his actions. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's really horrible to think about this. And what is so insidious too is you see how the prison industrial complex gets its claws into the American public. A lot of places where you mega prisons are built or private prisons, and now you could expand that to ICE detention centers, are areas of impoverishment and of lack of
Right.
economic opportunity more broadly. Oftentimes, They are the result of like the hollowing out of manufacturing in this country, and they
Mhm.
become job creators for those communities. And so when you talk about abolishing ICE, which needs to be the position of the Democratic Party, because once again, ICE was an outgrowth of the war on terror.
Right.
Immigration should be under the
20,
auspices. Yeah,
25 years later, like, yeah,
right. I mean, and we can imagine a world without ICE because it did exist. I mean, I'm older than
yeah.
ICE. This can go towards a more humane process where we can hear people's claims, and it can be under the Department of Justice as opposed to under the national security umbrella, which is
Mhm.
why there's this lawlessness. This is the
Mhm.
same, this is imperial blowback. It is how
Yeah.
we decided after 9/11 we were going to expand the security state, expand mass surveillance, and eventually, a lot of left wing critics of it at the time were saying this is going to come home and this is going to affect us. This is what is happening right now, and so that is, I think, the key point here is that they are very consciously trying to put a foundation down in a variety of different communities so that it becomes very difficult to dismantle ICE and to dismantle the DHS because literally communities might uh, rely on it for jobs. And so the Democrats have to act with the urgency that the Republicans are acting.
Yeah, and it's a good point because we saw that probably the shooters of Alex Preddy may have been Latino, may have been Hispanic from their
Yep.
names, and this is a group that's being deported and employed by ICE, which is a complicated variable. Want to talk about Prop 50 because Supreme Court, hard to find a liberal or even a centrist who feels particularly good about the Supreme Court, but this Supreme Court is not going to get involved in Prop 50, which is, of course, just for those who have lives. Gavin Newsom redistricted California, got Democrats 5 more seats. The kind of garish thing that we see Republicans do with a plum. What do you think about that? Because, like, I know that Gavin is not so popular for a lot of his views and also his podcast where he interviews people on the right, what platforms like the worst people in the world. But I do think Prop 50 is like a huge victory, and it's hard for me to imagine a world where Chuck Schumer does a Prop 50.
God, you can give Gavin Newsom credit for this. I still
Yeah.
think that if we return to his kind of politics in 2028 of throwing trans people under the bus, running to the
Mm,
right on immigration, I mean, he
right.
opposes many increases in taxes on the wealthy, and it's very important that we say that that's a non-starter, I think, in the Democratic Party because it's not just about hating rich people, it's that they're genuinely a threat to our democracy.
Well, and
And
they're
we have
not
to,
being taxed at a rate that is reasonable. But talk about Prop 50, because I do think it
yes.
is, it shows a way forward for Democrats
Yes,
going.
absolutely, absolutely. So, credit where credit is due. This is a really important step. We were just on our show today looking at there's a Brennan Center for Justice analysis of the 2024 House districts, and if there was nonpartisan gerrymandering, Democrats would have 16 more seats that would lean in their
Mm.
direction. And for the past 20 plus years or whatever, the Democrats have basically unilaterally disarmed and said, okay,
Mhm.
Republicans, you can engage in your gerrymandering. It's too uncouth for us. But
Right.
Gavin Newsom, to his credit, says, no, 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 we're not going to do that. The stakes are too high here. And it's encouraging that the Supreme Court decided that, hey, we don't want to look this hypocritical on this. And it may pave the way for even more consequential gerrymandering and the rolling back of the Voting Rights Act. I mean, we're going to be seeing a case coming forward about districts in the Southeast that the Supreme Court is going to have to respond to. So this may portend poorly for that for the Democrats,
Right.
but we're seeing in Texas right now. It's backfiring on them. They already
Mhm.
acknowledge that it's backfiring. That's why Trump's going out there and there's now this new push for the SAVE Act, which
Right.
would prevent tens of millions of Americans from voting if they don't have a real ID or if they don't
Mhm.
have a passport, which by the way, both of these you have to purchase at this point.
Mhm. Yeah.
This would disenfranchise so many people. They're already banking on the fact that their efforts to rig it through gerrymandering are going to not either be net neutral for them or net negative because again, they're basing this gerrymandering off of the 2024 results, where you saw
Right.
this Latino swing to Trump.
Tom.
All indications have shown, whether it's Mikey Sherrill, there was Union City in
Mhm.
New Jersey's a heavily Latino city, swung like 50 points towards her in the last race. And then we saw the special election in Texas, how that panned out.
Miami has a Democratic mayor for the first time in 21 years.
Right. So if they're drawing those lines in Texas along the Trump coalition that's already shattered with that in mind, that could also be a benefit for Democrats. So they have already pivoted to we're going to intimidate voters at the voting booth, whether
Mhm.
it's the National Guard or ICE agents. And think about Texas, where if Tallarico's the nominee, I do think that there's a pretty good chance, like for the first time since Beto O'Rourke, that Democrats could get close there. And so they're going to
Yeah.
have a collaborationist governor, Greg Abbott, saying,
Yeah.
okay, let's bring in ICE agents to intimidate anyone that looks brown
Yeah.
from coming out to vote because they're going to be afraid that this could turn the other way for them.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's exactly right, and I think we're certainly gonna see more of that. I'll be interested to see, like, the SAVE Act stuff seems so craven, and, we saw Rand Paul is not gonna be on board with it, but I wonder if Republicans will. I mean, it's next level bad. I wonder what happens with that.
Yeah, I'm concerned. And I don't think you can quantify it fully because it's going to be based a lot on intimidation tactics. I mean,
Right.
what's so ironic is that as they're rounding up people who are immigrants and separating them from their families or abusing them and putting them into these camps, at the same time the Trump administration is trying to claim that those people are so motivated to go out and vote in some, like congressional primary that they're going to risk sealing someone's identity
Yeah.
to vote in a race where there's a better chance than like their vote mattering that they're going to be rounded up and their family's going to be torn apart, and they're trying to claim that this is a systemic problem with voting in this country. It's just great replacement theory stuff. We have gone from that being correctly identified as a Nazi conspiracy theory to that being the line that Mike Johnson is repeating to the press.
Yeah. Mike Johnson is sort of an incredible cipher for Donald Trump. I mean, I don't think there's much going on in there besides, just a complete transmit of Trumpism and his sort of needs and wants. I mean, the polling, I just want to, before we're almost out of time, but I just want to read you a poll because I think it's so instructive and I think it shows where we are. So, Quinnipiac poll for the Trump administration, Americans say Preddy's killing was not justified by 40 points. That's double the margin on Good's killing. Also, 63% of Americans disapprove of ICE, 60% want ICE out of Minneapolis, and 58% want Nome removed from office.
I wish that polling mattered to them. It does to a degree. It does to a degree. And maybe to Susie Wiles, not to Stephen Miller, though.
Right.
But who this should matter to is the Democrats.
Yeah.
You have a mass popular will on your side. You just have to harness it.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's so right. Emma, thank you. I hope you'll come back.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me on.